I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. Some of it having to do with your background.
Okay.
I think obviously that's something that we can
Sure.
share a lot of information on. Also, talk a little bit about some things that are going on currently, just in terms of, in general, the environment of
Right,
economic
right.
development,
Got it.
as well as also in specific, kind of some background as well as some lessons learned from the Carolina Connector project. And I realize that that's a project that's ongoing, but from the standpoint of just securing the project together and trying to bring pieces together, I think over time it's going to be more interesting looking into it to see.
Are you going to
lessons.
show the actual taped interview, or are you just going to discuss?
We're going to show the
what
taped
talking
interview. We're going to show the taped
All
interview
right.
so that you know
That's fine.
what you feel comfortable and what
Oh,
you don't
yeah,
feel
that's fine.
comfortable.
Sure.
But this is not for. I mean, it'll be out there, but it's not intended to be on television or
I
anything like
understand.
that. So, I'll go ahead and start off. Kind of describe your career in economic development.
Well, I'm an NC State graduate, and upon graduation, I spent a couple of years in the military, and then DuPont hired me to work in agriculture. That's what I'm trained in, agriculture. I spent about 5 years doing agricultural advertising and communications. And then they moved me to the marketing side of the shop where I did sales work and then research and development activity, product management in the system. And so over the period of years, I developed, most of that was oriented towards selling and marketing and developing products. And then they moved me to Europe, where I lived for 6 years in Switzerland, running the agricultural business in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And once again, it was business development and filling needs of customers who had needs that maybe they didn't really understand what they needed. And so it was up to me and my team in Europe to help them understand how our products fill their needs. Came back from my European assignment and ran several other businesses in DuPont in agriculture, but also in typical electronics. They move you around a lot to give you experience and background. So I spent 5 years running electronics businesses, and that's where I finished my career. When I retired, I had then had all this international experience. I had run a number of different kinds of businesses, from agriculture to film to electronic connectors and electronic parts. I had done corporate management, corporate marketing and training jobs where I had actually trained other executives in DuPont to figure out what marketing was all about, and how to do it, and all that stuff. And so I have a very broad background in helping people make decisions about things they want to make decisions about. So when I came back, when I retired from DuPont, came back to North Carolina, I decided to use those skills to try to help change the complexion of the General Assembly and the lawmaking process, to put a business relationship into the process. So I spent a couple of years in the General Assembly, and then Governor Hunt, who was a classmate of mine at NC State, reached out and said, "I'd really like to have you come with your background in international marketing and customer relationships and the philosophy of selling and the figuring out how to help people make decisions that they want to make, but filling in the gaps of information for them so that they know how to make a better decision. I'd like you to come and consider running the Department of Commerce." So I did that. I gave up my seat in the House, and I went over to the Department of Commerce and ran that for a year. And one of the other things I should say is, in DuPont, you learn a lot about how to fix businesses that aren't working very well, or could be working better. Maybe that's a better way to say it. And so those are skills that after 30 years, they kind of they integrate your system. That's kind of the way you live and operate, trying to make things run better. And that's what Hunt was looking for at the Department of Commerce. It was struggling a little bit. Organizationally, it wasn't focused very well. Didn't set real good objectives. It didn't follow through very well. And that's all the things you got to do in the selling business to be successful. And so one of the things he asked me to do was to go over and see if I could help change that. And I was only there a year, but we were very successful in sort of reorienting the department to a more customer-focused point of view. Helping, first of all, to understand what it is your customer needs before you try to give them a solution. And we spent a lot of time doing that in my tenure at Commerce. Unfortunately, he didn't leave me there very long. He shifted me over to Department of Transportation, which was also having significant organizational issues. A lot of difficulty with making decisions and moving things along, and bureaucracy taking over the decision-making process and slowing it down to the point where it either didn't move at all or moved along at a snail's pace. And so he asked me to go in there and do that job for a while, which I did. It was funny. He gave me 45 days to restructure the Department of Transportation. Now, Department of Transportation is the second largest in state government. At the time I was there, it had 14,000 employees. Mm-hmm. And just tentacles everywhere in the state. So, but we were pretty successful at what we had to do there. And we got once again, all I did though was take a department that was already very, very good at what it was doing, but it didn't focus very well. Mm-hmm. It didn't create understandable and measurable objectives. And so I kind of put that, force fit that mode into the process at DOT. But once again, if you think about transportation issues, they are basically satisfying a customer's need, and in the case of DOT, the customer is the citizen. Because transportation impacts everybody's life, roads, and highways, and bridges, and overpasses, and trains, and the whole 9 yards. And so we spent a reasonable amount of period of time while I was at DOT trying to figure out, okay, what is it our customer is really trying to tell us? What is it he wants done? And how can we satisfy that within the confines of what we got to do as a department? So, and it worked pretty well. It was a little trauma every now and then, but it worked pretty well. But all of that, having said all that, once I left the Department of Transportation, I ran the Department of Revenue under Mike Easley, Governor Mike Easley. Department of Revenue was the tax collector for the state of North Carolina. But I did that for about 6 years. What I was able to do with my revenue folks is to say, look, you got to look at the ultimate citizen who pays the taxes, who runs the state of North Carolina. You got to look at him as a customer. You got to figure out, what can I do to help this customer understand what his obligation is to pay taxes, and then make sure they pay their taxes. And in its simplest terms, that's what Department of Revenue is all about: collecting taxes, and for those that can't or won't pay their taxes, figuring out how to help make that happen as best you can without too much drama in the process. So all of that, over those periods of experiences, after I left Revenue, I went to the North Carolina Biotech Center, which again is a business development, economic development type organization. And I did that for 7 years, where that's what we did. We connected people who had a company they wanted to move to North Carolina, or a product they wanted to create a company to surround, and we helped them do that. We helped them find the funding to do it. We helped them through the delicate process of keeping a product alive while you're making sure it works well. Because most of the companies we dealt with were dealing with human medicine. Right at the end of my tenure out at the Biotech Center, we got heavily involved in agricultural biotech, which is moving products along to help farmers grow food better. So, having said all that, I had a pretty extensive background to come and do what I'm doing here, which is again helping people who want to either move their company or expand their company or start a new company, figure out how to do that. So the mission of the Carolina Gateway Partnership is pretty simple. Create wealth by generating more investment in the Twin Counties and by creating jobs. And by creating jobs, growing the possibility for people to pay taxes and support the community while at the same time improving their own quality of life. So all of my career has basically been oriented to helping somebody else understand and articulate their needs, and then helping somebody fill those needs.
How has that practice or that industry that's known as economic development, the world in which you've worked, how has it changed over that period of time?
Oh, dramatically. Because in the early days, even back to my days in DuPont when we were selling our client base, it was basically face-to-face selling.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a certain element of that involved in the selling game these days, but it has moved so dramatically to the technology world.
Mm-hmm.
Economic development, when I was at the Department of Commerce, was again face-to-face with somebody like I'm looking at you and saying, okay, what are your needs and what can we do, what we have to offer North Carolina to satisfy those needs? Today, and that started all the way back to when you decided you had a need and needed somebody like the state of North Carolina to help you fill it. It was a lot of hand-to-hand, face-to-face, hand-holding and discussions and around tables like this one. Today, the game has changed completely. A major portion of what goes on in the economic development world today is done through electronics. A client will have, one of our clients here at the Gateway Partnership will have already assessed what's going on in the Twin Counties well before we get a project. They would have looked at our web page. They would have made overtures through the internet. They would have looked us up. They would have studied the area, the demographics of this area, the kind of folks that live here, the kind of the quality of life their employees can get if they moved here. What's the school system look like? They do all that homework where we used to be able to have to give it to them in writing form, if you will. Now they've done all that. When they show up and sit at our tables, they know as much about us as we know about us. So then it gets down to basically, do you have good sites? Do you have reasonable workforce capability? Do you have any incentives? And how quickly can we move? Because in today's time, even more so than ever before, when a client makes the contact with us at the Gateway Partnership, he has already made a decision to make an investment somewhere. Then it gets down to, is he going to make it here or somewhere else? So the major change that we've seen over the years is that all of the folks who are engaged in the economic development these days have to be very, very nimble. They have to have a reasonable, and my crowd around here laughs at me about that because I'm a technology idiot. But most of the folks around here are very adept with the boxes. They know how to operate the box and manipulate the databases, all that stuff. And if you don't know how to do that, because that's the way the client wants to communicate with you, they don't want great big thick notebooks anymore. They want you to electronically send it all. And as a result of all that, we are now, we now, with the advent of the CSX project, Carolina Connector, we are now starting to do almost all of our selling electronically. We still have contact with people, but we have committed every bit of the offering for the Twin Counties to iPads. And we will now, a client calls and says, I want to see the Kingsborough site out here between here and Tarboro. We now send him an iPad or get him in for a meeting and go through the iPad and let him take the iPad with him. It's his. The iPad has on that iPad all the data about that site, all of the topography, all of the environmental work we've done. It's got all of all the wetlands, everything that's got to be done to that site is loaded into that iPad. And then as our people continue to answer the questions for that client, we continue to feed them answers through the iPad. So it's not a matter of got to wait 3 days for the mail to show up. It's, instant. Oppie Jordan, one of our developers, was just telling me she worked through the weekend with a client who's looking at a site here in our counties. The guy asked her 4 or 5 very, very significant questions, a consultant working for a client. He asked him very, very significant questions. She was able to go to her databases or call somebody who had a database that she didn't have, and by the end of the weekend, we had answered all the guy's questions. Previously, that had to be done on Friday afternoon and Monday morning. Now it's sort of like 24/7. And consultants expect you to operate that way. Otherwise, they drop you out of the hunt. You don't get asked the next round of questions. Because if you show you don't have the capability to respond, or you don't have the technology to respond, they move on to somewhere else.
Let me ask you a follow-up with respect to that in terms of the role of consultants.
Excuse me, let me make one more comment.
Sure,
about
I apologize.
No. Come back to that question. But the other comment I want to make about the iPad, not many, if any, of our competitors are using that technology at this point. We think when we put our iPad, we are putting on the street as I speak now. We think that when consultants are saying to us, none of your competitors are doing this. So we believe that in a really, really competitive world, that gives us a little bit of a competitive advantage.
How often would they be dealing with a consultant as opposed to somebody from the actual business?
99% of the time.
Is consultant.
Yeah. It's really rare these days that we get a call directly from a client, or that we get a lead from the Department of Commerce or the Economic Development Partnership in North Carolina that is with the client himself. It is almost inevitably with a consultant. And the reason for that is that what the ultimate client says, I got other things to do with my time. I can go hire Fred, the consultant, to do this work for me, bring me a finished product. And if Fred does his job well, he gets to come to the party again. If he doesn't do his job very well, he doesn't get asked again. Mm-hmm. And so that's the reason consultants are very, very thorough. And there's some very, very good businesses been made around the world with consultants who have figured out how to do this well, and so they continue to get the project. They get paid very handsomely for it. Mm-hmm. So consultants are now the name of the game. We know that. And the other thing that's happened with the consultant business is that it started to specialize. I mean, we've got consultants that we only call on for food processing. We've got consultants that only do heavy manufacturing. We got consultants that only do distribution and fulfillment centers and return centers, and on and on and on. So we got consultants, for example, that only do biotech projects. Mm-hmm. They only do medical projects. They only do healthcare projects. And they get very, very good at what they do, and they also build up an enormous cadre of information, because in this game, information is king. Mm-hmm. The dissemination of information to a client rapidly and many times closes the deal. Most of the general public has no idea what economic development's all about. They are aware only when they see it in the newspapers that a project is looking at X. And generally speaking, they don't have an awful lot of knowledge, unless in the case of the CSX project, for example, we have gone out of our way to bring the public into the loop. We are holding regular information meetings with the public. We're talking to every service club we can speak to, because it's a very large, very complex project that will have major, monumental impact on our communities for years and years to come. And then to go back and sort of retract a little bit about the general public. General public is fearful that the economic development community will jam a project into a community just to get it done. They don't always feel like they've been communicated with, and especially if there happens to be any controversy around the project. If it is a project that will create significant environmental problems, or that will create enormous traffic burdens, or environmental issues like odor and groundwater contamination, Those are things that the public has a right to know about, but generally don't get involved unless there is an activist group somewhere that says this project is going to be dangerous, it's going to create long-term health hazards, and they gin the public up to get involved and either oppose the project or try to kill it. But generally speaking, most people understand that economic development is all about a better quality of life at the end of the day, creating the jobs and the investment to help the tax base and thereby create a good opportunity for people to get better jobs. The other thing that happens, especially in the world that we're living in these days, it used to be 40 years ago, if you wanted to have a good job in a rural community, you had to go somewhere else. What economic development is doing is changing that landscape now and bringing the good jobs home to us so that our children can go get an education, whatever they want to get, community college, university, or straight out of high school, and still get a really good job here at home and stay in a home area. That's one of the things that's changed pretty dramatically in the last 25 years.
As you and other developers here regionally try to develop strategies for recruitment and retention, what are the biggest opportunities in your mind for economic development in Eastern North Carolina?
Well, one of the cardinal rules of economic development is to don't go try to recruit something that you can't, that your communities won't be able to serve. I mean, there's no sense in going and trying to recruit a rocket science, a company that makes rockets, space rockets, because we don't have the capability in these communities to handle that. We don't have the workforce that can handle that. Our communities themselves won't be able to handle that. Automobile plants are a little bit dicey for us as you get closer and closer to the coast, because automobile companies don't like the problems that hurricanes create with automobile production. Messes up their schedules. And so while we don't think we've got that kind of a problem. We have hurricanes, but not enough to be that significant a challenge. So we are recruiting automobile plants. But if you were sitting down in Manio, you probably wouldn't go recruit an automobile plant. I mean, it just wouldn't make much sense. The other thing the opportunities, though, the Twin Counties today have a potential workforce of well over 100,000 people. Plus, if you look at a 70 to 75 mile radius around Rocky Mount or the Twin Counties generally, we have a labor pool that is close to 2 million. And the reason that has changed so dramatically is that people, 45, 50 years ago when I first got into the job market, nobody wanted to drive 30 or 40 or 50 miles. They wanted a job next door. We got tons and tons and tons of people, I'm sure you got some in your class, that are driving distances to go to work.
I did myself until I moved here.
That's a huge change. And that's a plus for us in the economic development business, because it means that the engineers in Raleigh are no longer out of reach for us in Rocky Mount or in Tarboro. We can get people from Raleigh to come down here for a good job. They don't mind driving it because you can drive from here to Raleigh in 40 minutes. Well, and 25, 30 years ago, that was a day. Today, it's nothing. I mean, most folks don't think anything at all about driving 40 minutes to work. So the opportunities, though, are, well, I mean, let me say another thing about economic development. Generally speaking, what you need to do as an organization like us that's trying to lead the charge is try to figure out what are the things that we are most likely to be able to recruit into our given area. And so we've targeted transportation and logistics, we've targeted healthcare, we've targeted distribution and again logistics, and we've targeted agriculture. We also are starting to encourage the biotech guys to look at us, because with the hospitals that we've got in the area, we think there's a pretty good possibility that small biotech companies would find a really good home here. I mean, all you gotta do is look out here at Pfizer. Pfizer's sitting there with 2,300 employees. It is a healthcare business. And right next door to it is Cummins Diesel. I mean, you can't be much further apart. Healthcare on one end and engine blocks on the other. But they are both very, very good businesses. So as we look at our communities, logistics and transportation, healthcare, obviously advanced manufacturing. We've got 3 or 4 significant projects now in the advanced manufacturing arena that are looking at our Kingsburg site. They like the site because they like the work ethic of the communities that we happen to represent. If you got a rural community, most people in rural communities know how to use their hands and how to connect their hands with their brains so that they can do pretty interesting work in almost anything that involves machinery or the thinking processes. So advanced manufacturing is a pretty good target for us. When I was at the Department of Commerce, the military guys were looking to locate a jet engine repair plant in somewhere in the South. They ran a study that said they wanted to find out how do these people measure up against each other in terms of their ability to do things. And they found that North Carolina in particular, but most of the southern states, if 100 was the index that said these folks can do almost anything that you train them to do, we were always at the 99 to 100% range. Whereas if you were in a less agrarian or less agriculture area, it would drop off to 75%. So these guys said, look, we want to put our jet engine repair plant somewhere where these folks know how to work on things. And we got it. It's now down near one of the military bases. During the recession in 2006, 2007, you know, when the economy went off the table,
Right.
North Carolina's unemployment was really high. What Michael Wallen and NC State found is that we had very high unemployment because we had imported unemployment into North Carolina from other places. North Carolina's reputation was so good at creating jobs that people were leaving other places during the recession to come here to find work. Well, we were struggling too. But our unemployment stayed a little bit higher, a little bit longer, because all those folks moved down here. Good thing for us. Well, they moved down here to find jobs, and guess what? They couldn't.
But the latest
So,
show.
the advantage we've got in North Carolina, and we made, the other folks have read our book on this. The community college system in North Carolina is second to none in the country. There are nobody out there any better than we are. Now, a lot of other states have read the playbook for North Carolina and have started building their own system of training workers. But I gotta tell you, it's pretty impressive when you sit a client down at a table and say, what kind of skills do you need? We can help you recruit the folks that will fill those jobs. We will train them for you at no cost to you. All you gotta do is hire them. That's a pretty powerful message.
That level of infrastructure.
One of the things that consistently surprises people about North Carolina is that when you say, I used to joke about it when I lived up north, when I worked for DuPont, I'd open my mouth and with a southern accent, everybody thought I was dumb. But people are amazed at the vision the state has had over the years. The community college vision was, when the founding fathers set up the community college system, what they said was, we want a technical school. That's what they were called in those days. We want a technical school within 30 miles driving distance of every citizen in the state of North Carolina. That's the reason we got 58 of them.
Right.
We probably don't need 58 in today's environment, but we got it. But people looked at that from the old days and said, man, how did they think about that?
Well,
And
they
then
do
the programs that have been put in place in the community college have evolved beyond just technical training. You know, how do you repair a car's motor, or how do you paint a vehicle, or whatever, to some pretty sophisticated stuff. I mean, the Biotech Center training facility right here in Rocky Mount is one of the best in the country. And some colleges can't match that. I think the other advantage North Carolina has is that we figured out a long time ago that when you have the systems work with each other, when I was at the Department of Commerce, one of the things that was a great asset for us, Governor Hunt, and Governor Hunt put this in motion, he said, I want the business community to work with the education community, to work with the political community. And when I bring a client to the table, he said, I want all three of them represented. That was pretty unusual 35, 40 years ago. It's still somewhat unusual even today in the widespread economic development around the country. We still do that pretty well in North Carolina. But the neat thing is, let me come back to the education piece. The four-year universities talk to the community colleges, and so the private schools talk to the community colleges and talk to the four-year. So they're talking, not as good as they should, but it's still pretty doggone good. And it's impressive when you bring a client around the table that you can bring somebody from NC State, somebody from Wesleyan, and somebody from Nash Community College or Edgecombe Community College, and they can sit around and say, what is your problem? We together can fix it.
Looking at it from your perspective, how do you would encourage someone, say one of our students who happens to be in their mid to late 20s, how would you encourage them to try to bridge that gap? Because they may have the proper training, they may understand the world today, but they don't necessarily have the experience.
That's a really, really good question, and it's a good question because the world has also changed in other ways, and instant gratification is the new mode. There ain't no instant gratification in this game. You need a student coming out of your class or any place else that wants to get into economic development. You gotta work, you gotta live in the field, and you gotta work in the field. And if you're lucky and smart, you will find somebody to mentor you in the field. Because you just cannot come out of a college class and know everything you need to know to impress a client that your place is the best place in the world for them to be to grow their business. That comes with time and experience. You develop it over a period of years. It's not something that's instant. We got folks that have been in this game 30 years that still aren't very good at it. They are not as good as they ought to be because they haven't tried to practice the craft, the trade. If it's just a job so you can get a paycheck, you will be terribly unhappy in the economic development business. Because the economic development business is full of more no's than it is yeses. You got to learn to be able to take the no, learn from it and move on. Because you're never going to ever satisfy every client that you talk to. That's the reason I emphasized the point earlier. You really got to like people. You're going to find consultants in this game that you just flat don't like. But it goes with the territory. And the good developer figures out how to manage that. You don't have to necessarily like it, but you got to figure out how to manage it. That's true in life. I mean, there are a lot of people you meet in life that you just flat don't like. You can't walk up and punch them all in the mouth either.